Yeah, I think it's easy to stay the course if you're doing something that you're passionate about, right? Or even if it's not necessarily something you're super passionate about, but something that at least you've decided, you've really sat down, stepped back, taken a while and thought through and said, okay, this is the right path for me, right? And then you can dive into, being in the moment and focusing on what I have to do day after day.
Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Tomchick. Welcome to the Connected Mindset Podcast, where each week we bring you the stories to better connect with the world around you. Let's dive into this week's podcast. Greg DeLuca, welcome to the Connected Mindset Live.
Greg, thanks for having me. Awesome
Absolutely.
To be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here, man. So one of the ways we like to start to give folks a direct connected line to who Greg is what's one of the biggest lessons? You've had one of the most decorated stories, and we're going to get to that. What is one of the biggest lessons that sticks out to you in all the transitions that you were able to make throughout that journey so far?
Two that immediately come to mind. One, be a great teammate is a staple for me. But really the most prominent is do things you're afraid of. And I think for me, probably more prominent just because be a great teammate came more naturally, right? I'm wired that way. Something I really enjoy, but doing things you're afraid of is something I had to, something difficult and something I had to explore a lot more along the way and think through and, I can probably articulate that one better because it required more effort.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember back to your childhood? Was it always like that, like playing with kids in the neighborhood? Like, were you choosing the harder path? Like, I'm going to be the running back, or I'm going to be in the position where I know I'm going to get hit to put myself in that difficult, tough situation?
Yes. Yes. I'm smiling when you say that because from as long ago as I could remember, I would say that was kind of a self-defining characteristic as a kid. I think the ability to sacrifice and delay gratification as a kid, right? Like I loved kind of rare things, right? I loved looking at something and saying, man, like that's really hard to accomplish, or that's really hard to build or achieve. Like what if I could do that, and it never in the terms of money or something like that, but it could be, I was really into BMX and riding BMX bikes and snowboarding. I was big into extreme sports, so to say, more so than organized sports until about high school. But if I was building dirt jumps in the woods with my friends, right, I would love to go out for 8 hours in the woods with a shovel and just build these jumps. And I remember it was my childhood best friend's older brother. I remember said to me once, we were building a snowboarding jump, and I was out there for, it had snowed 2 feet in New Jersey where I grew up. And I was out there for 6 hours building this jump at the bottom of the hill. And I remember him saying, you like building jumps more than you like hitting them. And it's one of those things that, like, I was smiling when you just asked, about that aspect of my childhood because it resonated with me. And I was like, this guy is exactly right. When he said that, I was like, you're right. Yeah. I love, I love being out there. And it kind of factors into that being a great teammate also. It's kind of doing things for, I'm out here building this thing and everyone else has probably gotten bored and wandered off and is playing something. But then when they come back, you're like, guys, look what I made for us. Yeah. Right. And that was always really satisfying to me.
Yeah. That's interesting. I hear a lot of people say in the high performance world, if you want to separate yourself from the rest, just prepare. And that's what I hear when, you love building the jumps, you love preparing for what would be that main event for most people where they just want to show up and do it versus doing all the preparation work. And I think that's probably a common thread that we'll get to, but that preparation aspect is something that sounds like you take extreme pride in, which ultimately sets you up to be able to perform, hit the jump right, because you actually built it and and craft it in a way that you felt was going to propel you forward.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In athletics, you hear people talk about the process a lot, or in any endeavor, right? In the arts and, whatever your chosen profession is, right? There's kind of the highlight reel, the highlights from games that you see and people get excited about, but that's less than 1% of what goes into it, right? Even same thing in the military, right? You sign up to join the SEAL teams and you see the highlight video of fast roping out of helicopters at night and, going in places and shooting bad guys. And you get into the Navy and you're like, hey, where's all that? There's a lot of, there's a lot that goes into it every day before you get to that level.
Yeah.
And get to do those rare things. But yeah, I really enjoyed the preparation and the process, as you said. Like strength and conditioning was something I was really passionate about and got into. And in the off season, I enjoyed training for sports almost as much as I like playing them. Right. And kind of throughout, if I wasn't training with teammates, right, that was always motivation for me, right? I'm doing this for the guys on my team. I would always play team sports. Even times when I was training by myself, which was pretty frequent, I was almost always thinking of teammates, right? Yeah. Of, I'm here in the winter by myself in the gym, but I'm thinking of 3 months from now, when I meet up with, right, when we're in the spring season, when we're practicing together, when we're in a game, when we're in the fourth quarter and overtime with my teammates, right? When I was younger, thinking of the older guys on the team, what are they going to think of me? How can I help out the seniors? That was kind of always a strong motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're either pushed or pulled. I know for a lot of my off-season careers, I had one coach when I was young tell me that I was going to get injured, and I felt like working out and taking care of my body would prove him wrong. So it was kind of his doubt was pushing me to go beyond my comfort zone. I think a lot of people listening in, and I want to get to the transition piece because you made a lot of big transitions throughout your journey, but I think a lot of people that are transitioning today, they start to feel the pain and then they retreat. I think that's a common theme I hear from a lot of people where they're going to start the company and they reach the point where they hit that first month of not being able to pay a bill. And then they are like, I need to go work for somebody else. So they almost, the dream is right on the other side of that pain, that uncomfort, but then they start to feel it and then they retreat. I'm curious, as you were transitioning from Duke to the Navy, obviously there was pain there and that you had to go through and withstand, and then transitioning into a second opportunity to play sports. I'm sure there was points where you're like, questioning, is this for me? Or is this something that I could pivot to go a different direction? It sounds like reading your story, you stayed the course for some reason, whether that was for your teammates or for, something deeper pushing you to kind of stay that course.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's easy to stay the course if you're doing something that you're passionate about, right? Or even if it's not necessarily something you're super passionate about, but something that at least you've decided, you've really sat down, stepped back, taken a while and thought through and said, okay, this is the right path for me, right? And then you can dive into, being in the moment and focusing on what I have to do day after day, right? In the starting a company example. Yes, on one hand, you should always be reevaluating things, but again, if you've decided, you've put in your homework, done the evaluation, said, okay, this will be successful if I do X, Y, and Z. This is a good idea. This will set me up for success. It's going to be tough for 2 to 3 years. And then, I predict X, Y, and Z. If you've done that, then, and you trust in yourself, right? I think that's another key. Like, do you have a good relationship with yourself? Do you have a good past track record with yourself, right? So if you say, do you trust your own decision-making, right? If so, then you can do something like that. And then, stop thinking about it, right? Then you just execute day after day. And that's where discipline and consistency shows up, right? The motivation fades. You're going to have tough days. But if you have a why and you believe that you're doing the right thing, then you just keep showing up every day, and that gets you where you want to go and separates you from a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, like I said, it was easier because I was pursuing things that I was really passionate about. So there was never any questioning, right? If you like at Buds at Navy SEAL training, you would hear people say, you have to really want to be here, or kids that quit, you don't want it badly enough. And it sounds cliche, and it was cliche to me going in, but being there, I was like, man, this is really accurate. It's really the best way to articulate it. You really have to want to be here.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's no mental break, right? When the days are long and physical and taxing. But especially when you get to the end of the day and you have gear prep or what kind of homework that you need to do to get ready for the next day, or the next day is going to be miserable. You don't want to find out. You have to get these things done at night, and that means you're cutting into your sleep time, and you might only get 4 or 6 hours of sleep. Then there's no mental reprieve, at the end of the day, which is one of the biggest things I think that would make the task easier, right? No matter how physically hard it is, right? Like in college, at any point in athletics, right? I'm sure people have done 2-a-days, done some really challenging physical things. But that was one of the main differences in Buds for me, right? At least in first phase, was rather than, okay, I wake up early, I go to the gym, I work out really hard, or I go to practice, I have a break, I eat lunch, I'm tired, I complain a little bit, but I pull myself together, come back for afternoon practice, and then I go home and, eat dinner and sit on the couch for 2 hours and watch TV, go to sleep and do it again. Right. Like that's hard. Yes. But that mental break, right, of sitting down and thinking about something else at the end of the day is massively helpful. Yeah. Right. And when you're always in it and kind of always under stress, and it just one day rolls into the next, you're like, man, you do have to want to do this. Right. Because if you have a plan B at the ready, like, hey, if I think I want to be a SEAL, but I also kind of want to do this, and so I'll go to SEAL training, and if I don't, if I'm not really feeling it, you're going to plan B really quickly. Right. I remember my parents being concerned. They're like, well, what are you going to do in the Navy if? I was like, I have no idea. Like, I'm going to be a SEAL. I've absolutely no idea. And at first they were a little worried about that, and then in hindsight they were like, oh, he was always determined. That's what he had in mind. But yeah, I think just making up your mind and being set on it and then sticking to it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you learned the lessons of, being at peace with yourself, prioritization? Do you think you've learned that through the journey of the hard times, or did you have something in your childhood that, whether it was books or parents or teachers or mentors that helped you connect those dots? Because I think for a lot of people, they know those are realities that they need to have, but they haven't gone through what I look at as like the muscle workout. Like they haven't worked that muscle out to make the connection to say, I can do this beyond what I thought I could do. I think about prioritization. I think about when you're in the hard, in your own mind, how are you processing that? Are you thinking about, sitting on the couch to watch the TV later? Are you thinking about the plan B? Or are you in it to where this is my priority? I need to get through this in order to, get to that next activity. And that to me is the ability to hyper prioritize when you're extremely challenged.
Right. Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, right? What that driving factor is and how you deal with things. For me, maybe the reason why doing things you're afraid of was important for me is maybe I was afraid of a lot of things. You know, maybe my nervous system was geared up. I think it's safe to say I was more motivated. People ask the question, do you love to win or do you hate to lose? For me, no questions asked, hate to lose.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's that fear of failure that would drive me all the time as you know, as a kid. And I was always worried that I wouldn't be good enough, essentially, you know, that I wasn't trying hard enough. I wasn't working hard enough. And that's just one of those things that, you know, I lived in my own head that way, you know, and I was a very perfectionist oriented. And, you know, I was really passionate about effort, right? Which I couldn't articulate that at the time for, you know, well after college, that word effort. But, you know, I would just, putting it simply, try really hard at things and train really hard for things. You know, I was always worried, you know, like that cliche that someone else is out there training harder. You know, that was me. That was me paranoid, you know, like someone else is out here training. I got to outwork them. So yeah, that was, whether, you know, growing up playing youth sports, and then in the summer you'd go to a tryout for a club team, a travel team. And it was the same thing all over again. Oh man, these kids are all the best kids from all the towns I played against. Am I going to be good enough here? You know, and you go there and super nervous, but it works out, you know, and you're like, okay, these, as my dad would say growing up, they put their pants on the same way you do, you know? You know, like, okay, I can compete with these kids and I can still try really hard and I find success with that, and, you know, go through high school, and then same thing, going down to college, going down to Duke. Like, wow, these are the best. I'm going to Duke's, one of the best programs in the country in lacrosse. You know, all these kids are going to be really good. I was a pretty good athlete and a hard worker, but not the most polished lacrosse player. And I remember my freshman year being down there for orientation, right? So before school had started, before practice had started, just at Duke, there's West Campus, which is the main campus, and then East Campus. Way back in the day that they were divided, it used to be all the men were on West Campus, the women were on East Campus, you know, 100 years ago. Now the freshmen are on East Campus. So just all of us freshmen are there the first week, you know, and we're like, all right, we're going to go over to the student gym and get a workout in, you know, and I remember, again, I was big in the strength conditioning, huge meathead in high school, and going over there and like doing my 20-minute dynamic warm up, and then doing cleans, and like was walking over to start back squats or something. And the other 9 guys were like, all right, like we're going to the, whatever, you know, we're going to the chow hall, whatever you call it, the dining hall. Like, you coming? It's like, and I at the time I was mind blown. I was like, I've got at least an hour and a half, like probably 2 hours. Like I'm on my second set. Like I haven't even started yet. And that was like this, again, I was so nervous about all these top level athletes from around the country. And this first week I was like, man, maybe I was working hard. And that would just continue. I would always doubt myself, and all these different kind of stages of life. I would, you know, get more and more exposure and increase my aperture. And then I think Buds was kind of the final straw there, you know, where I went and I would say, man, I always thought I was working hard. I always thought I was tough, but you know, you read these Navy SEAL books and talk about people saying, you know, you have to be willing to die before you quit. And I'm like, I think I've been working really hard. Like, I think I'm pretty tough, but like, am I that tough? Like, I don't know. Or is there a different level of, I would always put things up on a pedestal, right? Like, is there this other breed of person out there that's just tougher than me, that's outworking me, that I haven't met yet, you know? And I think going there finally, you know, it was important in my development for sure. In kind of closing the book of like, no, okay, there's as you have experienced and kind of thought, like there's just there's a limit on how hard people can push themselves, you know, and you're flirting with it, you know, like you've been there before. You know, you've seen what those limits are, and like, yeah, that's it. There's no magic beans that, you know, that other people have that you don't. So that was important for me to realize. And honestly, there were two experiences, one in college and then one at Buds, again, of kind of pushing myself to the limit physically, you know, where I didn't quit and kind of got past the point where everything ceased to matter, as I would describe it. And those were really important, kind of extremely important, like acute experiences in my life where I was like, that was as far as I could possibly go. And I went there and there's nothing further to do. And it's like, okay, I can do that. And that was, it was big for me.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, because I think one of the things that I toy with frequently is, are there actual limits, or is it the limits in our head and then the physical training limits that we put on ourselves? And I think, you know, for me in baseball, I didn't really reach those limits because I always still had somebody that I was chasing. Like if I was, you know, at one level, I'd be like, you know, Adam Wainwright is in the MLB making millions of dollars, so I have to try to get to his level. I never reached that, but I always thought about, you know, if he's in there for an hour, I need to be in there for 2 hours. So it was trying to raise limits continuously. But I think with what you just hit on, you kind of have felt that the limit at that time. So do you, when you look back now and how you live your life now, do you feel like there is an actual limit, or do you think it's something that we psychologically set, and then obviously we have to train to, once we reach that limit, maybe we get injured? Do you feel like there are limits, or do you feel like there's still limitless ability to keep going even when things get really hard?
It's a great question. I think it really depends on what category we're talking about, right? As far as talent, 100%. I have a ceiling, I have a limit, right? As far as lifting weights, strength, right? I know roughly I can work out as hard as I want for as consistently as I want for 5 years. Here's roughly what my back squat max is, my bench press, my clean, you know, these are my kind of genetic ceilings. But I think, you know, what I was talking about and kind of chose to focus on a lot was effort level, right? Like how hard can I push myself physically? And that was, you know, and that is, I don't know if I would say there's a limit or there's not a limit. Essentially it was like, how would I word this? If you got on a treadmill, right, on medium speed, not too high where you're going to induce muscle failure or cramping or something. If I had to, could I get on that treadmill and run until I'm unconscious?
Yeah.
Right. That was real. Those were kind of the experiences that I was talking about, not literally on a treadmill. Yeah. Don't need to get into those right now, but yeah, it was essentially running like that with resistance, with weight. Like, will I quit when I'm still able-bodied and minded, or will I do this until I'm collapsed? Like, can I essentially fight to the death? And like, am I okay with that? And realizing that the answer was yes was big. Yeah. It's like, okay, I realize that I will do, like, if it's not fun, but like if necessary, like I will do absolutely whatever it takes, without quitting, and that gave me a lot of confidence in myself, because that's all you can do, right? Like the talent thing, how good you are. It's almost like when I was younger, I used to think that, if you got in a fight, if you won a bunch of fights, then that made you tough, and then at a certain point in college, I was like, okay, it's not maybe it was a shift more towards effort. I was like, okay, that winning or losing does not matter whatsoever. It's just being willing to do it. You know, it's just being willing to scrap. And I don't mean literally, I'm not like encouraging going out and getting in fist fights. It's not, I wasn't doing that then either, but it was just the mindset of, oh, it's not about winning this, you know, could sport, fight, whatever. It's about trying as hard as you possibly can and not giving up. And like, can I do that under any circumstances?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the common theme I see is you built the rapport that you needed with yourself to push past, you know, worldly limits or the limits somebody else was putting on you, because you knew that you would keep going until you passed out. And I'm sure there's something freeing about that. I know for me, when I had a coach or somebody push me past where my mind thought was my limit, that's where I felt like I was floating proverbially. Like I had evolved to the new version of myself, because I had untrust in myself or distrust. And then now I trusted myself more because I kept a promise or I stayed the course. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the only way I feel like we can really accomplish things beyond ourselves, is when we have that rapport and trust with ourselves. Because oftentimes the outside world, and I think that's the big thing about being a great teammate and having great teammates around you, is they propel you to go past those limits if they're great teammates. And it sounds like that, you know, that lesson, be a great teammate, is something you pushed other people to go beyond themselves, which I think is, when we look back on people we care about and trust, typically they do that for us. And that's what connects us to them. Is I know I can go to them with a situation. They're going to tell me how it actually really is. And then they're going to help push me as I need to be pushed to get past it. And I think that's what helps you, because you have that trust in yourself, you're able to build it with the outside world and be a great teammate, which I think is something we all look for in coaches. As you as a coach today, I'm sure that's something you give to your athletes. And I think that's a lesson anybody can take away is, you know, how do you build trust with yourself? Well, it's, you know, doing things you say you're going to do, and then pushing yourself to the limits, to the point where you're almost proving yourself wrong, which is mentally that can be a little bit toying or torture in the mind. But that's what I think grows the psychological resilient muscle at the end of the day, which I think it's cool to hear just through the journey of athletics, and then in the Navy, and then going back to athletics, and how you can bring those lessons to your family, to your kids as they grow up, to the athletes you coach. I think that's something they're all seeking, but they don't know they're looking for it yet.
Right.
So
that's something I think is really neat is the hero's journey. Right. I actually just familiar with the concept. I just cracked open the book this week. Joseph Campbell, I think it's called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And it's you know, as you just described, kind of living in your normal world, living life kind of blind to what's out there, and get the call to adventure, right, from somewhere. Usually deny it at first, you know, and it comes back and hits you over the head harder, like, hey, you need to get out and come do this. You know, that could be intrinsic, or it could be, you know, circumstances thrust upon you, or somebody that's pulling you out. Could be a mentor, a coach saying, hey, you need to go push yourself, you know, and you kind of leave the comfort of your everyday life and go out and have your adventure and trials and tribulations, you know, and typically at the lowest point where you're most in the unknown, right? You kind of venture into the abyss and deal with whatever monster you need to deal with, slay the dragon, and hopefully he doesn't slay you, right? And you come back and you learn lessons from that, and then kind of complete the loop at the top where you reintegrate with the community and take back the lessons you've learned, and then, you know, go back to your life, but, you know, slightly more aware and you know, a little wiser, and you can share that with your family and the community.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think on a macro scale, that's what I'm doing now. Obviously, I've turned a page in life as you have as well, with getting married and having kids. Having kids mostly significantly changes things, right? I'm not going out on a whole lot of personal adventures right now. I can't wait until the kids get a little older and can start doing that with them. It'll be a blast. But right now, I'm not. When I was younger and single or married without kids, was still in the SEAL teams and deploying and traveling around training. And I love that, right? I love all that stuff. But now I have kids, just want to be around more, right? Want to be home for them. And now I'm able to be more part of the community and I'm able to be a coach and, hopefully share some of those experiences with kids. And then, but you can't just tell someone lessons and they're going to pick them up, right? They've got to go experience them. So, just kind of provide that call to adventure, right, to other people now. And, just give them a little window of what's out there and hope that they are interested in it and go out on their own path and go explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all about the action, the experience that I think helps it sink in. And, one of the things I noticed about your story was the theme of mentors, like the teammate or the graduate that gave you the book that led to your passion to want to join the SEALs. And then, going back after the Navy to go play football again, you had a connection at your high school that got you and helped you get into there. And we talked about that off the show, but just how those small connections to people helped kind of almost give you little breakthroughs on what your next step would be. How did that start? Was that something as a kid you just kind of had your eyes and ears open enough to see like this could be something I do because this person's doing it, to kind of get inspiration? Because I think we all need that inspiration of somebody to look up to, someone to kind of project to ourselves in 10 years. And you kind of find people throughout it. I look at them as mentors, even if they don't say any words, but you're looking up to them as, this person gave me a book that they enjoyed. And now this is going to be my future career.
Right. Yeah. I think I was extremely fortunate in the mentors that I had growing up, right? Started with my parents, and family. And then the coaches that I had in high school, right? At football and lacrosse were the two sports I always played. And, I think you'd be really hard pressed to find a better duo of football and lacrosse high school coaches, on the planet than what I went to high school with. The football coach had over 300 wins while I was there. I'd been there 44 years, used to be the principal of the school, athletic director, just pillar of the community, right? And lacrosse coach, football coach has passed away now. Lacrosse coach is still there, actively coaching. He's early 70s, I think. He's the winningest active coach in the nation. He's, and I don't mean that these guys were successful because they won a lot of games, right? They won a lot of games because they do things the right way and they're successful, right? I think as a coach, you can win a game, maybe win a couple games by trying to take shortcuts, and not necessarily do things the right way, not play fair, right? Just play kids that are really talented, but maybe have terrible character issues. But over you don't win for 3 decades like that, right? The culture goes down the toilet and your program falls apart. So yeah, Doug Wilkins, football coach, Tim Flynn, lacrosse coach, absolute legends of the community, right? And were a huge impact. And then went down to Duke, and lacrosse coach there was John Danowski, who's again still there, winningest lacrosse coach in Division I history. Another, legend, and the assistants there are phenomenal, all still there, still keeping in contact, and are reasons for some of the things that I'm doing today. Even college football coach David Cutcliffe was hate to say it, out of those 4 guys, probably taken fourth place, but he's a phenomenal football coach. It just speaks to, the other three are all no question Hall of Famers, like really unbelievable. And then of course going into the military had the good fortune of working with good leaders and not necessarily people that, as you said, maybe, some guys that would not know my name, probably wouldn't recognize me if I bumped into them now, but just being in the same building, right, watching or maybe seeing them speak one day. There's somebody that comes to mind that I'll give a shout out, Jimmy May, who I now follow on. He has these awesome LinkedIn posts all the time. Came and spoke to our class in training for one day. And it was one of those, this guy's presence, the way he spoke, the things he spoke about just blew me away. And I was like, I want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, have been really fortunate in that aspect of having mentors to look up to. But also I think a really, really key thing that you brought up is just teammates and who you surround yourself with, right? Like that, I think the quote is, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And that's completely true, right? We're so influenced by the people around us and our environments all the time, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not. It's just a fact, right? You can't get out of. So I was extremely lucky in the high school teammates I had, the programs I got to be a part of, that kind of emphasized a lot of great values and life lessons. And then in college, same thing, teammates I was around that really pushed me. And then in the SEAL teams, right? That was definitely one of the best aspects of being in the Navy, just being around guys like that all the time, right? And the standards that they had for themselves and for each other. And even not at work, just living in a house down on 20th Street in Virginia Beach with 2 SEAL roommates, right? And just seeing how those guys live their lives every day, right? Like if I buy a whiteboard and I write my schedule up on the whiteboard, then, the next week the other guy has a whiteboard and he's got his organized better than mine. I'm like, that's a good idea. Yeah. Or, I wake up at 7 a.m. one morning and, the house is empty. Everybody's gone. Their cars are gone. They've all gotten workouts in. And I'm like, I messed up today. I got to set the alarm clock earlier tomorrow. Just that constant, somebody goes to Whole Foods and buys groceries and you're like, man, he's cooking a really healthy dinner, right? Yeah. It's just that constant feedback from seeing positive things that your peers are doing and taking ideas from them. So that's been huge throughout my life.
Yeah. Yeah. How do people, I think one of the questions I get often is, how do people get that push from others? Like I did in professional sports and people get when they're operating at a high level with other people that are as invested in them as they are in themselves, making them optimal. I think a lot of us, after we get out of sports or after we get out of the military, it's hard to uphold that standard because we might not have those people around us pushing us as hard.
Right.
Obviously we do through spouses, and our kids are holding us to certain standards as they get older. But I think a lot of people want that team environment and they don't traditionally get it from, corporate America or the teams that they're surrounded with internally, which I think kind of forces us to lower our standards to some extent until we fight back and maybe start a company or we do something that we're like, we need a team around us if we want to keep getting better and better. But we feel that dip when we first get out, and maybe you felt it, maybe you haven't. But I know when I got out, I felt a dip of the standards around me weren't the standards I was used to, which was somebody like, pouring water on my face to wake up or, yelling like, we need to get up because we need to do X, Y, Z. It was now the voice in my head, which was, I know I need to get up, but I can sleep for another hour. And and then it tests your trust with yourself of, now I'm not meeting the standard I want to meet. And then you start to question, like, do I trust myself? Do I have the right goals? All of these different confusing things that I think a lot of people get into through any transition they go to, like you from college to the military and then from the military to, back to college. I'm sure that was a little bit of shock, even though you had a kid on the way. That's a completely different environment, right? You go back to college athletes versus that SEAL mindset. I'm sure that was kind of somewhat of a, not a D level, but it was somewhat of a change of standards that you had to adapt to.
It was, but I think, as you're familiar with, at least in college athletics, I think everyone's striving for that and looking for that, right? And if you can come in with certainly habits from athletics all my life, but then, additional habits from the SEAL teams and just from being older, right? From no matter which kind of path you're on at 29, you're hopefully a little brighter than you were at 21, right? It's just, hopefully every year you're learning more about the world and trying to improve yourself a little bit. So yeah, I think those lessons were received well, and looked well upon in an athletics environment. And you're certainly not trying to, you don't, not a guy to ever walk into a room and start telling people what to do, right? I think you just, you just show up and like, who's this old guy with the, I came in with a beard. The only time in my life I've had a beard, but, who's this guy with the full beard just working out like an animal in the weight room? What's his deal? Why is he on the team? And, and you just work really hard and be friendly to people for a couple weeks. And then, they want to hear more and are interested in what you have to say. And that was a really unique kind of mentorship experience, where you can certainly you try to be a mentor as a coach, but there's just not the same as literally being a player and being on the team with them in that position, where you're going through everything, doing the same workouts, going to practice with them is just a really cool experience. But what you said about, transitioning out of one really high performing world into another that may not have the same standards, definitely resonates. Right. When you, especially leaving the SEAL teams, there's not a whole lot of communities that are going to operate at that level. Right. It's just, the stakes are high and you need to be passionate about what you're doing or you need to get out of it. So yeah, it's not the same level of intensity doing commercial real estate, right? It's just not. Now I work with great people, which is one of the main reasons why I went to the firm that I went to. The two guys that I worked the most with and sit right next to, and one played lacrosse at UVA, one played soccer at UVA, and is a big gym guy. That was my initial introduction to the company. Just went to through Mike Waring at Waring's Gym. Really got along really well with Mike. Think he's an awesome guy, and we just go to Waring's when I lived down there on 20th Street and work really hard. I loved going to the gym, and had a good relationship with Mike. And completely out of the blue, had no idea I was transitioning. Had no idea I had any interest in commercial real estate. Just was talking to him, and afterward, just sent me a text after we had met in person and said, "Hey, just thought of this. Pat Mugler from the gym, really successful guy, commercial real estate, hard work in the gym. He's always looking for high character, high competence people." And it was just one of those, I don't know, connections in the universe, where it wasn't spoken. It was just right time, right place. I was like, I'll be damned. How did the coincidence was incredible. But I've gotten off topic. But
no, I think the character and the work ethic is what people really notice at the end of the day. A lot of people think it's all about talent. I think in the business world, athletics, military, people focus on the people that shine most. I think initially are the highly talented, like freak athletes, those types of people that really shine. But what I've found is the people that get to what we see as society as the next levels, it's the work ethic, the character, the things that are more intangible. I know for me, when I got drafted, the person that drafted me said you weren't the most talented pick we could have chosen, but we see you as a person that could lead the younger guys or lead the people around you to make the team better. And that it didn't sit well with me at the time, because I was like, what do you mean I throw 95 miles an hour? Like, I feel like I'm the greatest, thing since sliced bread, and I've got great talent. But when I got to when I got to my first day in the minor leagues, I realized everybody threw 95. So it was a level playing field. And the only way to get better and move up was to increase your leadership skills, increase your ability to communicate, your leadership. And that's what, in an even playing field, I think levels people up. And that's what it sounds like they noticed in you, was the work ethic, the character. Obviously you had talent, but I'm curious if coaches ever told you, because you mentioned earlier, like, you might not have been the most talented person on the Duke team, but you were able to elevate, to one of the best players. If coaches ever told you, like, you're too much of this, like you work too hard, or you're working too much, like anything of that nature that coaches would say that wasn't a talent metric, like maybe you're extremely fast, Greg, you're so fast. But if there was anything they would tell you that was character related, like, we love how you talk people up, or we love how you, when things are down, you support the team, and anything of that nature that popped up or was a common theme throughout the different teams you were on that separated you, kind of character and intangible wise?
Yeah, I think just that work ethic in combination with really wanting to be a good teammate, at risk of overusing that phrase on the podcast, just went a really long way, right? I was a quieter person, a pretty shy person growing up, so didn't talk a whole lot, and that could have been, maybe that was my love language, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, effort was how I showed my teammates, like, hey, I care about the team. I'm trying really hard. Maybe I can't articulate this that well, or I'm not gonna be vulnerable and say, hey, Greg, you did an awesome job today, and this and that. Maybe I wouldn't explicitly say things like that. So I would, do things by, like, doing nice things for other people, or working really hard in practice. And, I think that just bought me a lot of friendships, right?
Yeah.
If nothing else, a lot of respect from teammates, and then friendships, and kind of trust on and off the field, which is a great thing to have. It's a great thing, certainly in sports, but just in life, right? It's a good way to live life. I think human relationships are one of the most important things out there. And it all comes back to you, and, having great relationships with people is extremely rewarding, and just really fortunate to have a lot of friends from teams I've been on, and guys I've worked with and went to school with, that, that I can call on, and yeah, it's a good place to be in. Yes. I think. Yeah, there's something you mentioned that I wanted to touch on, but it's escaped me at the moment. So,
yeah, one of the things my coaches said early on, which what you said resonated with me, was being too quiet. Like, they wanted, because I had the ability to have, like, small group or one-on-one conversations, they wanted me to, like, speak to the team, but they'd be like, Greg, you work so hard, but you're too quiet. You need to share, what you're thinking. And for me, that was my biggest superpower, because I was so focused on leading by example that I didn't want to water down that example, that action that people were seeing, with words that I couldn't necessarily articulate to them, because it didn't really connect in my brain. I wanted to show younger guys or teammates or even older guys, like, this is how I feel the right way to do. And then they would challenge it, and I'd shift to, run one extra pull, or change my motion in this way. But I think that leading by example is, especially in today's social media world, we need more of that lead by example versus lead by just the words. I think, words there's so much information out there now. And I think not enough great examples potentially. And I think a lot of people are craving those types of examples. And I think that's what this podcast and others can provide is how are people living as an example and how can they, articulate that. And I think that's something that was a common theme in my sports journey was you don't really have to be the loud person to be a leader. And I think you've probably, seen that through the teams you've been on is that might've been the people you looked up to was the quiet one that was, doing 3 hours in the gym when everybody else was, going to the chow hall after 30 minutes. And I think that's incredible.
Yeah. It's interesting. In recent years, I've heard a little bit from very well-respected high-level coaches, a little bit of an attack on leading by example, right? I've heard conversation, and I certainly see both sides to it, right? Conversations of we don't need people to lead by example, right? If you're going out and working hard, that's, in the conversation, they'll say that's the standard. That's what we expect of you.
Minimum.
We need leaders to go out and grab other people and hold their teammates accountable and get them to go do it too, right? Which certainly if you can do both, awesome. That 100% makes you a better leader. I think the total poo-pooing on leading by example is probably over-exaggerated, right? Certainly not everyone on your team does. I don't care what organization you're on, whether it's Alabama football or SEAL Team 6, right? Everyone on your team does not have the same commitment level and the same work ethic level, and everyone has temptations and distractions and, the temptation to take a shortcut or whatever is always there in whatever your line of work or profession and, trade. So I think saying that, hey, working really hard is the standard and acting as if there's a flat standard that everyone works to and there's no deviation in there is completely unrealistic. So I think they're both important, right? If talking about doing things you're afraid of getting out of your comfort zone, if I am a really good leader by example, totally legitimate and, good on you as if a coach or another player or whatever comes to you and said, maybe an upperclassman comes and says, hey, we see what you're doing. Like you're doing a great job. You're setting a great example. Here's a couple ways where you could speak up, or even if it's, it might not be given a pregame speech, but it might be just, hey, you're going to the weight room. You're going out to shoot. You're going out to throw balls, whatever. Just text 3 of your buddies, ask if they want to come with you.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to motivate them. You don't have to do whatever. But instead of just being silent and going to the gym, send out an invite. See if other people want to come with you. And then when you're at the gym, you can lead by, just by working really hard. It's going to raise the level of those guys. So there's both, right? Being vocal is important, and bringing other guys with you is important, but setting a good example is equally important.
Yeah,
right. You can have as I'm a coach now, if I had everyone on the team totally committed and bought in and worked really hard and just none of them spoke up much to influence one another, I'll take that all day long. Right. If we can get that level of commitment and buy-in, then, I'll give them a speech before the game. We'll figure that part out. But man. Yeah, a lot of different ways to lead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an excellent conversation. This show was started all about kind of connection and helping people connect to these lessons, these breakthroughs that are going to help them elevate themselves. And I'm curious, through all the transitions you've been through from, going to a top tier college to joining in the premier, group within the Navy that a lot of people know about, to going back to college, to raising a family. What is the word, when you hear the word connection, what does it mean to you today?
Oh, it means everything. I mean, that's something we were just talking about, right? The relationships that you form throughout life are largely what makes up your life, and the quality of experience and the quality of life you're going to have, right? Going through life alone is not a fun thing, right? I think solitary confinement is about the worst form of punishment we give to people, right? You put them in prison first and act even worse. You put them in a room by themselves, and that's torture to people. We're social creatures, and yeah, I think just being a good teammate, acting with, trying to have integrity and building trust and doing things the right way just sets you up for a lot of positive connections, right? And like the other day, every Saturday at practice, we start off in the locker room, and we'll either do kind of a whiteboard talk where we'll watch film. We try to have a little bit more time on the weekend. So we'll do a little mental and kind of program development stuff first. And somehow the motto came up, right? It's not whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game. Mm-hmm. And, kind of a cliche that everyone hears in elementary school sports growing up. And some people like it, some people don't like it. It's probably overly simplified. Yeah. But we started talking about that, and it's like, look, this is the idea behind this is life. Life is a bunch of iterated games, right? It's not. Mm-hmm. It's not like we were talking about earlier with coaches, right? You can take shortcuts, you can ignore character and play talent to win a game, or to win 2 games, but over the course of several years, several seasons, your program and culture are going to go downhill. And that's in life, right? Like you can, right? I can have a blindside hit and tee somebody up and, go helmet to helmet and knock their best player out of the game. Does that mean, is that going to help us win this game? Probably, it probably is, right? If I go, knock in lacrosse, if I go knock the goalie out of the game, does that give us a better chance at winning? Yeah, it does. Yeah. Right. If I do that 3 games in a row, is anyone going to want to be on a team with me? Is any other coach going to want to schedule us? No. Right. So that's what we're getting at, right? It's not about one thing. It's about people wanting to play with you in the future and asking you to come play with them. And, in the business world, obviously you see the implications of that, right? Can I screw you over on this one deal? Can I sell you a car for $10,000 that you're going to drive it for 5 miles and the transmission's going to fall out the bottom? Like, yeah, I can do that once, but, and I might make $5,000 off it, but then you get a reputation and no one does business with you. And then you make no money for the rest of your life. Right. It's just understanding that, like, could I take a shortcut today and be successful? Yeah, I can be successful today, but I'm screwing myself tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, connections long term. Exactly. And connections momentum. It's the momentum you're building by doing the small things right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you're feeling more connected from this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with someone that you care about. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Connected Mindset Podcast.